Hey, I'm Randy, and you're watching The Cheap Audio Man. Today we got a really special guest, Enno from Roon. How are you doing today, sir?
Good, very well. Thank you. Thanks for having me. How are you doing, Randy?
I'm awesome. Enno, it sounds like a James Bond villain or something like that. Enno. You know what I mean?
I know. I get all kinds of you wouldn't believe. Yeah.
Today, I know I talked to you before. We had a really nice interview, and you were going to be gracious enough to kind of take us on a little bit of a test drive, kind of a high point view of Roon with your screen, and I'm excited. Before we start that, though, I am doing a 100,000 subscriber giveaway. I'll link that video right here, but don't go away. You got to come back. So go check out that video. It'll tell you how to enter, and Roon is actually giving away some stuff for that giveaway. So that's pretty exciting. You're going to give away some Roon. Roon's giving away Roon, right?
That's how it sounds. Yes, indeed.
All right. And then all those keyboards behind you, right? Or no, probably keeping those.
Today's sponsor is Squarespace. Squarespace is a ridiculously easy way to start a website. Take your hobby and make it into a business. Or take your business and make it look way more professional with a super cool looking website. You can have it up and running in less than 3 hours. I did, and I'm not very smart. Actually, I had asmac.org. I created that website because a whole bunch of people were in the comments telling me that all the stuff I was talking about was not audiophile. So since nobody has a corner on the word audiophile, I took it and I made a website out of it, asmac.org. It's the Audiophile Standards, Measurements, and Certification Committee. And I had it up and running in less than 3 hours. That's right. I got the domain. I reserved it. Well, I didn't reserve it until I bought it. Got the domain, created the website, was able to look at the website and what it would look like before I even had to pay. And then I bought it. And I actually used a 10% off coupon from another person on YouTube. Start one for your family photos or videos. If you have a kid and they're mowing lawns, start one for them. Because it's really easy. You can just drag and drop stuff. So now your kid, when they're handing out their cards, they have a professional website. And they can get their own email addresses. Mike at Mike's Lawn Mowing Services and PetSitting.com. Rolls right off the tongue. But how cool is it that you can just start a website for anybody and have it up and running in no time at all? And hand out some cards. Look real professional. There's also analytics, so you can see who's getting on your website and from where and at what time. I don't know if that's important or not, but there's analytics. Somebody's looking at them, otherwise they wouldn't exist. If you're a photographer or videographer, put your portfolio up online. And guess what? We're all music enthusiasts, right? So why not start your own website? Do reviews. Give Stereophile a run for their money, because you can do it in less than a day. Less than a half a day, you can have a bunch of articles up and running, and you could be competing against Stereophile. You could be the next audiophile website, if you want to be. You can even sell products, accept payments. Squarespace.com, the easiest way to start a website. Squarespace.com/cheapaudioman if you want 10% off your first purchase. I think really any purchase. You can just keep using it if you want to.
Go for it. This is yours. All right.
Cool. That's great. Yeah, last time we talked kind of conceptually about what Roon is, what it does, how it works, some of that. But a lot of that is sort of abstract until you actually kind of see the product, see how it works, get a feel, and kind of navigate around a little bit. So this time I was hoping to go through some things that may not be obvious from looking at our website or from hearing about Roon from a friend or whatever. Just kind of take you through some of the highlights that you'll experience when you're using the product. So here, I'm running Roon on my laptop here. This should give you a good sense of what we can do. But this user interface, you can have this on your iPad, you can have it on your phone. I'm sharing it here from my desktop for the sake of kind of clarity. The first thing that I want to point out is that Roon's obviously a music player. But it's not an app in the sense that it just plays back locally here on my laptop. One of the key things is that Roon is designed to work with whatever audio gear you have in your house. So if we look down here, we've got my studio controller here. But so here you can see all the different zones that are available in my house. I've got my son's Sonos and a Name Unity Atom, and I've got a Google Home Hub thing in the kitchen, and someone's listening to something in the gym right now, Roon can play to all the devices around your house. So one thing that's important when you're setting up is to enable, just turn on everything in your house and enable all the devices you see there, because you may not even be aware that you have devices that are compatible with Roon. So for example, I'll go down here, like here, this is Apple TV is in the master bedroom in my house. I could just enable it here. And actually, I don't know what the password for that device is, so I'm going to skip that. But the point is, basically anything in the house here I can enable, and Roon will treat that as a zone where I can listen to different music in all the rooms, where I can link them together and play them in sync. So Roon is really a whole home audio playback solution.
Yeah, and they have to be on the same network though, right?
They do, yes. Yeah. So these devices are all either on the Ethernet network in my house, or they're on Wi-Fi connected to that same network. So they're all reachable via the same local network. Another thing is that Roon started off as a player to play back your local files. So if you'd ripped CDs or you had bought downloaded music or whatever, that sort of thing, your old iTunes library, it was designed to play files first. And it does that very, very well. Roon will scan all the files that it has, it finds on a local hard drive or on your NAS or wherever you keep your music files, and it will add metadata. I'll show that off in just a second. One thing that's really, really key to get the absolute most out of Roon is that in addition to having your local files, is also to add your login to a streaming service. Roon supports both Tidal and Qobuz, and that's really, really important. I'll show you actually. Let me pick something right here. This album, I happen to have the files because I had the CD and I remember ripping it. So I know this is on my hard drive. So what you see here is all this information. Roon has identified this album and brought in all this extra metadata. So none of this is coming from, it's obviously not coming from the CD. This is all these the credits and all the information about this album Roon has added. But actually, let me find something. So I've got some Aerosmith here, and I want to see, this version is my old CD that I ripped. You can see that it's a 44.1 kilohertz 16-bit FLAC, so that's obviously a CD rip. But here you can see there are different variations of that album also available. So there's a version on Tidal that's an MQA encoding, 4824 that decodes to 96K. There's a 9624-bit FLAC available on Qobuz. So this is where it's really, really important to hook up your streaming service, because you're going to get access to a lot more content than you have locally. And to me, this is the optimal experience, because I have my local files and they're very representative of my music taste, but I want to be able to kind of jump off from there and explore new stuff too.
Right.
So having those streaming integrations, having those logins entered into Roon is really important. So you can see that here. If I go to services, I can sign into various services here in Roon. So I'm signed into both Tidal and Qobuz. So I'm going to see anything that's available on those services in addition to my local stuff. Mm-hmm. I just showed you the sort of the Aerosmith versions, 3 different versions of that album, but I want to give you a little bit more of an exotic example of what happens there. Obviously, hang on, let me jump to an album here. Here we're looking at the album browser in Roon. So this is all my albums, and I've got whatever 8,800 of them. So there's a lot here. Man. I'm just going to start typing to filter.
Yeah.
I just typed PHAR. I'm going to go to this album by Pharrell Williams. So again, this is a CD rip. I think, no, it's 24-bit. I don't know where this one came from, but again, none of the information that you see here was in my file tags, right? Maybe the track titles were, maybe the artist name was, but here the whole description of the album and all the other people here, the artists that are mentioned in this album review, none of that was in the albums.
There's Miley, there's old Justin, Daft Punk. That's cool, man.
A little bit of everyone, yeah.
So that's just sucked in from like the album description.
Basically, yeah, what Roon does is it identifies this album and says, we know what this is, and it goes out to our cloud service. We've got a database where we aggregate data from all different sources. So there's a bunch of different databases that we license, and we kind of munge all that data together. So somewhere we may get, let me open this up. We might get the release date, the fact this was released on the 4th of March, 2014. We may get that from one data source. We may get this review that you can see here from a different data source. So we kind of pull all that stuff together. So when Roon sees that I've got this album by Pharrell on my hard drive, it says, okay, here's all the info you need. Here's everything we know about Girl by Pharrell. Here you've got your track listing. One of the most interesting things that we do, and this is kind of it's not a holdover from physical media, but it's something that I learned to love as a kid and we all feel very strongly about. I used to read liner notes to albums when I bought albums. And this isn't to say, oh, back in my day, it's not about that. It's that what we were trying to create here, what is the modern digital version of that? How can we do something that's like liner notes, but even cooler? So here what we do is on the credits tab for this album, you see everyone who's credited on the album and the role that they, the thing that they do. So here you've got the main artists.
Brian Dembo took his LinkedIn profile picture and threw it up there. You got Miley Cyrus, all these great pictures, and then Brian.
And then down, you've got down to like all the string players and all the horn players and the producers and the engineers and all that stuff. So everyone's kind of listed here as if you were reading the liner note. Likewise, you would have expected to find the lyrics in the liner notes. You've got that here too. Depending on the album, some albums, on this one in particular, we happen to have even track level credits. So not who performed on the album, but who performed on a particular track. So here we're looking at track 2, brand new. Here's the broken out by kind of roles and responsibilities. The composers and the performers are up top. Then we've got the kind of production personnel down below. But you can see this is really granular. This goes all the way down to the horn players on this track. Now, one of the things that we do is, this isn't a lot of data, obviously, that we've pulled together about all these different albums. What Roon tries to do is to say, what's the most important? This is a lot to digest. So what's the most important thing on here? Well, Justin Timberlake is listed as a primary artist. So that's probably kind of important. So what Roon does here is it pulls out his name and it lists him right here in the track listing, because that's considered to be the most important thing that you might want to know about that track.
Okay.
So yes, there's a lot of data that you can explore, but Roon's always trying to take the most interesting stuff and surface it for you, put it right in front of you. The next kind of tip as far as how to get the most out of Roon, I feel like, since Google came along and the way all modern streaming apps work, we've kind of gotten used to this idea of search for something and then go to it. So search for a song, play it. Search for a song, play it. That's a pretty common interaction these days. But with Roon, you can kind of do a lot more just by, you can search for something and play it, but then you can also kind of explore from there and see where that leads you. And that's what some of the feedback we get is that's one of the kind of the most fun things to do. So here, for example, I'm looking at this album. I could go check out Pharrell as an artist. So here I'm going to see, I'm going to get his bio, which is going to include links to his socials and, his website and bands that he's been a member of, other artists that are mentioned in his bio. So, just from like, maybe I like one song on that album, all of a sudden I'm exploring all this stuff that's very closely related to it, but that's not that. The idea is that you can kind of go on these journeys. I'll give you some examples here,
and if you're sitting in your chair, with your iPad, all this is popping up at the same, just like on your laptop, right? Or your computer.
It is, exactly. And that's kind of the use case for this kind of exploration stuff. It's a little bit like, in the same way that you binge watch on Netflix, you end up kind of binge listening here, because every time you play something, you're presented with a couple of other things that you might want to check out next. And that's kind of the feedback that we get, that people just kick back on the sofa with the iPad and just sit there for hours doing that.
Yeah. That's my tagline at the end: binge, listen, and fill your soul with happiness.
Well, there you go. If I go a little bit further down Pharrell's page here, I can explore, here's some recommended albums for, fans of Pharrell. Here's Roon will try to surface these insights. Like, imagine talking to someone who had read the liner notes to every album on earth and could be like, oh, hey, did you know that? So here we have, Pharrell and Ariana Grande as collaborators. Here are things that they've worked on together, which is something you might not know. If you were a super fan of one of them, you might, but the idea is that Roon's trying to surface these things for you. Similar artists. Here we can see influences and followers. So I can go and say, well, Prince was an influence. And now I can click through, and now I'm looking at Prince in very much the same way. because of the kind of artist that he is, he collaborates with so many different people. One thing that we can do here, this should probably be a bullet point on its own. I have 2 Pharrell albums in my library that I actually have. But if I go over to his discography here, I can see everything else that he's ever worked on Tidal and on Qobuz. So this is another example of why it's so important to have your streaming services signed up, because then you can really go out and explore more stuff that you don't have yet. So here are his main albums. You can see here's singles and EPs. But here, I'd like to show this because he's such a prolific collaborator. Here's the 12 albums that he did with Snoop Dogg, and 9 with Jay-Z, and 8 with Beck, and so on and so on. This is basically everything he's ever worked on, broken out by collaborators. In the traditional, I was talking about that search and play idea. In a traditional media player, like a file-based media player, like iTunes or Windows Media Player, whatever, everything was sort of like folder tree based. You kind of drill down, find a thing, play it, back out again, then drill down again. And everything in Roon is designed to be this kind of forward moving experience to draw you in. So if I'm looking at prints here, I want to be, anything I see is clickable. Anything about prints that kind of interests me, I can explore. So here are all the genres that he performed in. I could click R&B as an example, and here I could look at R&B as a genre, read a little bit more about it. If I wanted to, I could just say play now. It's just going to shuffle me all kinds of music from R&B with a slant towards things that are stylistically similar to Prince.
Wow. Here's some
R&B albums in my library. What's that?
I'm sorry. I was saying, if you go into the Prince door and then you click on R&B, then it's like the Prince R&B area.
Well, there is this notion of the context that you come from. So if I'm listening to, we do this, there's a feature that we call Roon Radio. And that is, if I play a track and I don't play anything else, Roon will then pick other tracks to play after, like it's kind of DJing for me. If I play like an R&B track from the 60s, it's not, the next track it plays isn't going to be something from 2022. It's going to kind of keep it in a vein where it's sensible. It's not just by genre. It's not like search for all R&B and shuffle. That would be a little basic. So we do try to keep this contextual sensitivity. So if I'm listening to, again, like 70s rock is very different from 90s rock or whatever, we try to keep it kind of in the same vein. I pointed that out because there's always this balance between, sometimes I want to really go hunt and explore and search around. Sometimes I just want to kick back, right? So that play now button for R&B, I can do that and go make dinner. That's the end of my job is done now. It's just going to keep picking music for me. But sometimes I want to kind of lean in and explore and learn and whatever. So here I can see I've got some album highlights from my library in R&B, some artist highlights. Here are new releases in that genre, right? So these are kind of picked for me based on stuff that I've listened to that are new releases. This is obviously powered by the Tidal and Qobuz integrations. Recommended albums. And here I get into the subgenres, right? So if I really want to nerd out and say, okay, R&B is too broad, I want to get into, let's say I want to go into funk. Now I'm going to be reading about funk and get some featured albums and featured artists, the same kind of thing, new releases. And I can dig down. Some of these genres go really, really deep. I would go to deep funk. So in some of these trees, you could end up 6 levels down into crazy, like tech house, who knows, whatever, right? But so the idea is that if you're interested in exploration, there's always a place to go. There's always more to look at. Or if you just want to kick back and let Roon do its thing, you can do that too. So following these links is, to me, is like the most important thing. Don't just play back the track and, listen to it. Actually go explore, follow this stuff around. Here you can see, so I'm looking for deep funk. I've even got some sort of terrestrial radio stations recommended, and I can click and listen to those. I don't know how interesting this is. I got to touch on it quickly to your viewers. I don't know if there's a lot of classical fans, but if anyone listens to any classical music at all, it's really kind of a nightmare in most digital players And in most streaming services, it's really hard to find anything that's, like you get the, greatest hits of putting your baby to sleep with classical, this or that. Like it's not really well organized. So what we did is we took this view of classical music and said, if you're a classical listener, we're going to start with the composer, because in any kind of contemporary music, you've got artists who make albums and those have tracks on them. It's pretty straightforward kind of hierarchy, right?
Right.
In classical, it's not so. Most of the most famous composers are long dead. So, there is no notion of artist and album in the same way. The data works differently. So if I go here, for example, I'm looking just at classical composers. If I go to Beethoven, I'm going to see this doesn't look very different to the view that we had of Pharrell earlier, but it's very different in the sense that this is all about his compositions and his biography and his other contemporary composers. So it's a very specific view. And obviously Beethoven never recorded any albums. There was no recording when Beethoven lived. So what we're looking at here is not albums by an artist named Beethoven. We're looking at albums that feature compositions that he wrote. So those could be his very, here we've got Charlie Brown Christmas, right? There's few releases on that. So that shows up here. So this is sort of looking at the world through that lens of the classical fan. Instead of having top albums here, we've got compositions. So the Ninth Symphony is the most popular Beethoven composition, Beethoven work. Here we've got recommended albums, notable compositions broken out by form. So symphonies, concertos, sonatas, string quartets. That obviously varies by composer. Different composers are known for different things. And then you get into some kind of crazy data that you wouldn't see anywhere else. Like, who are the top conductors of Beethoven works? Huh. That's all here too. So anyway, I had to do the quick detour into classical. If that's your thing, that's a very kind of rich vein to mine. I want to talk a little bit about the home screen. This is something new in Roon 1.8. I mean, new, we released this last year. The home screen is designed not just to give you a view of your music library and music that's out there in the world, but it's a view of kind of all music that's relevant to you and your tastes and your listening history. So it's all very, very personalized. This was a big step for us last year. So I'm just going to kind of scroll through my homepage and you'll see what you see. So here you can see, well, first you see a summary of what's in my library. I've got 4,700 artists, 9,000 albums, so on and so on. Here I've got some of my recent activity, what I've played, albums that I've added to my library. Those are all here and I can kind of flip through all of those. So if I say, oh, what was that thing that I heard on Tidal the other day and I favorited? What was that thing? I just go to added and I can kind of flip through. Here's the things I added in the last few days. Here's the new releases for you, which are, again, this is based on what's in my library, the stuff I've collected, and based on what I've listened to. This is kind of what's out on new releases right now that would be relevant to me. I don't want to see every album that came out because there's a lot of albums released every week these days. I want to kind of cut through that noise and get through to just the stuff that's relevant to me. So this is based on stuff that's in my library, stuff that I've listened to. And it's pretty varied. It's kind of, we got a few genres represented here. There you go. That's my, how to quickly get caught up. Now I could go check out one of these albums. Let's check out this album. I can go here. This is on Tidal. So this is an MQA FLAC on Tidal. I can add this to my library with this plus button. That will now show up as having been added to my library. It's as if I went and bought the CD and ripped it. Right. So yeah, it's a streaming title. One thing that's different about Roon from most other music apps is we kind of have this idea of a library, a collection. For people that use streaming for casual listening, this may not be as important, but all the people on the Roon team and most of the users out there come from a background of collecting. And, it's like, your record collection is like a badge of honor, it's sort of part of your identity in our world. So we think of this idea of being able to add streaming albums to your library. It's almost like, being able to go on a shopping spree. I can just go out there and find anything and add it to my library. But Roon kind of keeps it all organized as if you owned it. And that's the experience that we're going for.
How cool would have been, like, I don't know how old you are, but I used to shop for CDs at Walmart, wherever it was, right? How cool would it be, like, to think about it as in, man, I want a shopping spree. So I get 2 minutes to grab every CD that I can possibly think of. But nobody thinks about that as far as like streaming. But that's what we really have. We have an
Well, here's
unlimited
what we have,
shopping
but
spree.
it's one of those things where suddenly if you have everything, it doesn't feel like you have anything. And that's kind of
Yeah.
frustrating. That's why we created this add to library idea, which is that, I used to go, when I only had, when I was a kid, I'd go to the record store, like I could only afford one or two records, whatever it was.
Right.
And I had to agonize, choose which one's it going to be. And that process kind of, in some ways, kind of, it formed, like I had a stronger bond with that album because, it was the only one I had.
Yeah.
Obviously we don't have that. We're post scarcity, as they say. We've got everything now. How do you make those things feel special? We still like the idea of collecting it, even if there's not a physical object to have anymore. I still feel like, oh yeah, the day that I added that, Denzel Curry album to my to my collection, I remember doing that. So we're trying to keep that going a little bit because that's kind of part of the connection that we have to music, I think.
That's pretty cool. I never thought it just kind of occurred to me like this is like a shopping spree. Because I know some
Yeah.
people, the comments I've heard is, well, I don't want to spend another $12 a month on, a music streaming service. And it's hard to like, I know people don't conceptualize it, but really what this is you think about you're paying $12 a month for Roon or whatever it is, and then you're paying, $9 a month or $10 a month for Tidal. So you get $22 a month. I used to spend probably $30 a month, back in the 90s and the early 2000s, just buying CDs, and I'd get two,
Exactly.
Now it's like, man, whatever you want. And you have a curator. It's kind of like what do you call it? The wine sommelier, whatever the heck they're called. So you have, oh, by the way, have you tried the new Jack White album? That's kind of cool.
I do understand that people get that kind of subscription fatigue, but it's always funny to me. From my point of view, music is cheaper than it's ever been, just like you just said.
Yeah.
Like weirdly, TV is getting more expensive. I've got more, video service subscriptions. Those really add up, right? Because those are each $10 a month, and I've got 4 or 5 of those to cover all the shows that my kids want to see, whatever it is, right? So music to me still, it feels like the biggest bargain it's ever been in history. So
I agree with you 100%.
Cool. All right, I'm going to keep going down this page here. So new releases, albums, and singles. Again, these are kind of picked for me based on my history. So the more you listen and the more you use Roon, the sharper these get. But it's funny, actually, I should mention quickly that we have this idea of profiles. So for everyone in my house, there's a different profile, right? So everyone's got their own favorites and whatever else. So when my 12-year-old daughter logs into this, she sees a completely different page. Her new releases look nothing like this. And frankly, I don't know any of the things that she's seeing because it's tailored to her, right? And that's the idea. But that's an important idea, having profiles. So I don't have to, we don't mix in with each other's stuff. We have our own playlists, we have our own favorites, we have our own recommendations. Everyone kind of gets their own thing.
Yeah.
Another example that I hear, daily mixes. We do this every day.
Can I go back to something real quick, Anna?
Yeah.
So is it unlimited users as far as like if you sign up for Roon and you have 6 people in your house, everyone gets it?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. And that's just on one account, right?
One account. Yeah.
So that's really cool.
So because Roon typically runs on a PC or something in your house, that's the core, that's the main thing that the license goes with that. The subscription goes with that. So, you got 10 people in your house, they're all using it. That's just how it works. So it's that one, it's more like I think of it as like a house being licensed subscription, more than
that's
anything.
cool.
Yeah. So down here, we're looking at your daily mixes. Every day, Roon will make up 6 mixes for you based, again, on your library, your history, whatever else. Excuse me. I listen to an awful lot of jazz. So these 3 are all jazz, but they're all different kinds of jazz. So I don't know, how much like, so I've got my, my sort of post bop, Miles Davis, Bill Evans, Charles Mingus, whatever. I've got here more like fusion, Weather Report, Metheny, Al Di Meola, and here I've got Keith Jarrett, Jack DeJohnette, Brad Melda. They're all like, to a jazz fan, these are 3 very different playlists, and each one, if you open it up, it's sort of like it's a 25-track playlist based on the theme of that main artist. So it's stuff related to that artist. They're always different. We're very, very careful I mean, obviously these are algorithmically generated, but those algorithms we spend a lot of time making them kind of sensitive to your taste as a music fan. So what you may find on other services is say, I want a playlist of all the, artists in this genre, and you get kind of like the top hit from each one of those artists. Roon tries to be a little bit more creative than that, right? Because we all know the top hit by every artist. That's not
You're getting
that
some
interesting.
deep cuts here.
What's that?
You're getting some deep cuts here.
That's the idea, like kind of push the boundaries of what you know, what you're familiar with. That's kind of how we grow as music fans. At least that's our theory, right? So that we're trying to do that all the time. Like give you a bunch of things that that you're really comfortable with, and then throw in a couple of outliers to kind of, to widen the horizon a little bit. So we get 6 of those. So those three are jazz. Here, clearly very sort of 90s rock, Stone Temple Pilots, Faith No More, Soundgarden, Pearl Jam. Here's a classical one, Angela Hewitt, and then another jazz. Those change every day. I could open up this one and say, I could play it right now. I could say, oh, wow, this is great. I really love this. I want to save it because tomorrow this will be gone. So here I could just hit save, and it will save it as a playlist in my list of playlists. So if I think this one's really outstanding, then I can always go edit it. I can take out the few tracks that I don't like or add in a few more that I want. I can save it. So that's kind of a cool idea.
Man, I didn't even know. I mean, I've been in Roon a lot, and I didn't know this was a thing. But I didn't know that I could like save it as. Yeah, that's cool.
That to me is one of the coolest things. I mean, like getting all the curation is great, but sometimes I'll be like, okay, I'll get 3 recommendations and 2 are good, but 1 is just mind blowing. I need to be able to put it somewhere so I don't lose it. That's the same as like adding it to my library. That idea, I just need to collect it somewhere. So saving that as a playlist is kind of cool. Here, you've got a kind of a view of your recent listening. I've been away for a few weeks, so you can see my listening history on this system is very, just a few days here and there. I've been on the road a lot. So this, don't hold me accountable.
Man, you listen to some Tool. Nice.
Yeah, well, gotta do it. Show's coming out. They're playing London.
Are they?
Actually, speaking of which, let me see. I may be able to show you one other thing. This has been weird in COVID because there have been so few live shows, but typically, I don't see it here. Roon will also show you upcoming concerts by an artist. That's another thing.
Wow.
So as you're browsing around, and then you can kind of click through to Songkick, and they will redirect you to whatever site will let you buy tickets to that show. That's another big favorite of mine.
That's cool.
Yeah, especially after 2 years of having no shows. I'm buying tickets like crazy.
Oh, I have been too, man. I went to a Korn show. Came back, found out they were touring with Evanescence later in the year, and bought tickets to the next Korn show with Evanescence in September.
Oh, cool. Nice. This is a new thing that we've just been doing for the last year or so. We've started curating playlists of our own because we figured we're all kind of deep music nerds, so we should kind of share that a little bit. So here we've got a whole collection of Roon curated playlists for, some of them are thematic, some of them are genre based. So you got classical. But we try to do pretty like kind of left field stuff. So not like, greatest hits of 90s rock. I mean, I can do that off the top of my head. That's not that interesting. These are all kind of really kind of helping you explore some stuff you probably didn't know about. So yeah, they're all over the place. They cover different genres, different geographies. There's a whole set of different jazz from different countries in Africa that I had no idea about. So that's been really fun. And then what else we got here? Live radio so radio stations that are recommended for me, artists that I've listened to recently, done something with recently, and then genres. So this is just based on, I guess, some of my listening lately. This is a quick jumping off point. If I really quickly want to go to post-pop jazz, boom, there I am. So the idea of the home screen is that, some days you sit down and you think, oh man, I've had this earworm in my head. There's this track I got to hear right now. And other days, and frankly, for me, a lot of days, I don't know exactly what I want to listen to. I need, give me some inspiration, So this screen is designed to kind of behave a little bit like a music magazine, to throw a bunch of stuff in front of you. I mean, this is pretty varied, from techno to post-bop to modern creative that's a kind of classical. It's kind of all over the place, right? So something here is going to catch my eye and say, ooh, maybe I'll start there today.
Is there
what's that?
Is there like an offline? So let's say you're getting on a plane, you're not going to have internet, or you're in your car. Is there a way to kind of leverage Roon's muscles in offline?
There isn't yet, but I will say that there will be soon. That is something, it's
Very cool.
probably one of our most requested feature. I mean, you saw with the multi-zone, if you look at this, you see all the different rooms of my house are lit up. Roon started off as a very much, fill your house with music kind of product. And that was the idea. But obviously this user experience, as we develop it, like you can imagine this would be really cool to have in the car with you or on the plane or at the vacation house or whatever else. So that easily our number one most requested feature is, let me take this with me when I leave the house.
Yeah.
So as readers of our community site will know, we've been bandying this about for some time. So, watch this space. I'll say that.
Very cool.
So the idea here is give me some jumping off points. This is supposed to, give me some like serendipity, just, I want to be inspired. So here's some featured collaborators, 2 guys who appear in my music library, who here are the albums where they played together. And I'm sure for these guys, it's quite a few. So yeah. And then down here, you see playlists that we're bringing in from Qobuz and Tidal, because obviously they have their own curated playlists.
Yeah.
So we bring those out onto the screen as well. That's kind of, that's it for the home screen. There's one thing I wanted to talk about, and it depends on how people think about this stuff. A lot of people, I think since the advent of iTunes, have used playlists as their sort of container for music, like I like this thing, throw it in a playlist. But we come from a very sort of album oriented kind of view of music. Like this is an artist, this is the album, less track based. And when you're trying to organize albums, playlists are terrible because you end up with a playlist with like you put in a few albums and you've got 100 tracks in your playlist already.
Right.
It's a very unwieldy way of managing that. So we have a couple of ways in Roon for organizing your stuff that isn't playlists. And there's one in particular that I'll show you. How will I show you this? If I go to this album that I just added, I can say, I can add this to a tag. So you can add tags to your albums. Let me just go over my tags and show you what I mean. Tags are collections of stuff. It could be albums, could be tracks, could be artists, could be a mix of all of those things. So here's this book that I was reading, 1,000 Recordings to Hear Before You Die. As I was reading this book, I was getting so frustrated because it was recommending all this really cool music. It's like, I don't know if you've seen this book. It's like 1 page per album, things that you got to know. And I was like, I got to listen while I'm reading. And I was kind of, so I didn't want to make a playlist of all these albums. So I created a tag where I could, I'd go find the album and I'd add it to this, I'd tag it with this 1,000 recordings. So as I'm reading the book, here's all the stuff that I've discovered as a result of reading that book, which is pretty cool.
Wow.
Some of the other tags that I've done, here, I lived in Boston in 1990 and 1991.
Okay.
Sometimes I'll make a tag that's like a time and a place. This is stuff that I remember from that time.
Yeah.
So I do some tags like that. I do some for, let me see, people who recommend, like my friend Mike, who's our, who heads up product on the Roon team. He's recommended a bunch of stuff to me, and I file it here, so I can always go to the stuff that Mike recommended to me. This is a tag that I've only put on artists. There's no albums in here. But here I can kind of lump all my favorite contemporary jazz artists together, and I can one click get to all of them. So there was no way you could store 21 artists in a playlist, obviously. It doesn't make any sense, right? But this is a cool way to be able to browse to my favorite artists. So this is the idea of this feature, is that it's there so that you can kind of make the experience work the way, what makes sense to you as an individual.
Yeah.
So yeah, there you go. That's that was my highlights.
Very cool. Did you have so you talked a little bit about offline music. Is there anything else that you can kind of hint around about that you guys are pushing towards for the future?
The one thing that's no secret at all, that is something it has been a major push for us for years now, is that we're constantly working on integrating with more hardware manufacturers. So right now, Roon supports like so I think it's over 1,000 different audio devices from like 200 different brands.
Yeah.
And we're always trying to grow that, so that the idea is if you have a piece of audio gear in your house, we want Roon to work with it. Or if you're thinking about buying a piece of audio gear, we want to be sure that Roon works with that.
Yeah.
So that's been a big focus. And that whole program has really exploded over the last few years. It's accelerating more than ever. So that's not news. It's not a secret, but it's definitely an area that we're expanding. We're looking at integrating more streaming services over time, particularly to reach markets where the ones that we have right now don't reach, to give people more choices. I mean, that's the way Roon is evolving. We want to be kind of the glue in the middle of wherever you get your content. So whether you buy stuff from Bandcamp or you rip CDs or you do streaming, we want to aggregate all of that.
Sure.
And then we want to be the thing that allows you to play all that content on any different hardware that you have. So we kind of, Roon sits in the middle. That's the idea.
Yeah. Well, one of the cool things, and sometimes people get a little bit intimidated because they feel like they have to go out and buy all this equipment. And the cool thing is most of this, if it has AirPlay, you can use Roon on it. And
absolutely.
Chromecast.
In fact, there's something I saw here when I was showing you that I wanted to mention, but you could see on here. Here, you see my iPhone turned up in this list. You got, I've got an old Android phone kicking around. I can install the Roon remote app on that, and I could plug it into my legacy stereo with just a Y cable, and boom, it's a Roon zone. If I have an old stereo that's got no streaming capabilities whatsoever, you can kind of retrofit older gear too.
Yeah. And that's one of the cool things about like giving Roon a try is you don't need all this fancy equipment. You can install it on a computer for the core, and then you can use most of the stuff you probably already have kicking around the house for an endpoint, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we see even in the super high end people who have the most exotic systems. I mean, nobody buys new gear every year. It's like you have to kind of make what you have work, and that's definitely something we strive towards.
Well, that's awesome. Well, Enno, I really appreciate you taking the time and kind of driving us through this from your perspective. And I like it. I wish I could. I'm going to spend more time in Roon and really start to dive deep in this. So I think it's great. And I know that it's a 30-day free trial, right? If somebody signs
on the website, it's 14 days. Although I think with the link, that's a 14-day free trial and then a free month, I think, if you sign up.
Okay, yeah, that's right. So I know that our previous interview, we had something special. So this is awesome. I really appreciate you coming on, man.
No, thank you so much for having me. It's been great.
All right.
Thanks so much.